Hi, I'm Peter Hilliard. I'm here once again to talk about musical theater, specifically Gershwin today. This spring, I music directed a production of Crazy for You at Villanova University, and I was all set to give this post-show talk. But unfortunately, we had to cancel the performance at which I was scheduled to speak due to an actor illness. Now, the kind of material that I prepared is usually also the first section of my blog post that I write about the show, but I thought this time it might be more effective if I try and demonstrate what I'm talking about. So I decided to convert that post-show talk to 2 videos. I hope you enjoy them, whether you are working on a production of Crazy for You, or whether you're just interested in musical theater, or maybe George Gershwin, or American music in general. My question to start this video off is, what makes Gershwin's music so distinctive, so immediately identifiable? He is both somehow the quintessential American songwriter and the least like his peers. And even his peers thought that at the time. They said so. Today, I hope to scratch the surface of that question and in the process, give you some things to listen for in Gershwin's music that sound like Gershwin, things that make Gershwin's music Gershwin-y. And then show you also how the creators of Crazy for You worked in that sound world to create such a memorable and authentic sounding show. Frank Rich opened his review of the original 1992 Broadway production of Crazy for You with the following: "When future historians try to find the exact moment at which Broadway finally rose up to grab the musical back from the British, they just may conclude that the revolution began last night." In the 80s, after a wave of British shows like Les Mis and Phantom made such a cultural impact, Broadway producers were struggling to find a counter-narrative of their own shows. The 80s were also, in some respects, a decade of cultural conservatism and American idealism. In some circles, there was this feeling that we needed to recover a vision of America's past that glorified the value of hard-working creators, immigrants, and their children in a bustling free market melting pot, building the ideal America together against all odds. More than Cole Porter, who had some money, more than Irving Berlin, who never managed to write classical music, even more than Rodgers and Hammerstein, Gershwin seemed like the perfect example of this kind of success, which we all at that point somehow agreed was really admirable. And of course, I agree with that now. Gershwin's music is also extraordinary. So it was a wonderful exploration, a wonderful thing to explore. So Crazy for You is part of this wave of nostalgia shows in the late 80s and early 90s. It's also part of a Gershwin craze that started in the American popular culture in the early 80s. Rhapsody in Blue was played at the opening ceremony of the '84 Olympics by 84 grand pianos. This Gershwin craze finally tapered off in the mid-1990s, right after Crazy for You hit the boards. So it was sort of one of the last big moments in the Gershwin revival. During this time, Gershwin concerts appeared everywhere. All his major and even his minor works were re-recorded. Musicologists reconstructed and re-examined forgotten work from the Gershwin catalog. Part of this new nostalgia included revivals of older shows by Gershwin and by others like Cole Porter, Irving Berlin. But Crazy for You is not actually a revival. It is a reimagining of a totally different show, one that had been very successful in 1930, but which really can't be revived today. And that show is Girl Crazy, and it was a sensation when it opened. Girl Crazy was the Broadway debut of 2 legends, Ethel Merman and Ginger Rogers. They don't get any bigger than Ethel Merman and Ginger Rogers. They had their debuts in Girl Crazy. Audiences were very excited about Merman's sustained C at the end of I Got Rhythm. Crazy for You sustains that long C in I Got Rhythm and then modulates up to a long D flat as if to out-Merman even Merman. Gershwin's music is extremely popular with American audiences, but unfortunately the style of storytelling in most of Gershwin's actual shows makes them hard to revive. We expect different things out of our musicals now. Consequently, there have been numerous attempts over the years to build brand new shows around the songs that the Gershwin brothers wrote, to take advantage of those songs that we love so much without the plays that they originally sat in, which now seem clunky, outdated, or worse yet, even maybe problematic. Somehow, Crazy for You feels different than these other reboots. Ken Ludwig's book captures and beautifully modernizes the zaniness of 30s shows. But why does Crazy for You feel musically so authentic? Well, the orchestrations for Crazy for You were written mostly by William Brohn, who would go on to orchestrate Carousel, Showboat, those revivals that followed, in addition to Ragtime, Wicked, Curtains, newer shows. Curtains, of course, sounds like an older show, but Ragtime and Wicked have some newer stuff too. Brohn understood this music quite well. One of the numbers in the show, Slap That Bass, was orchestrated by Sid Raymond, a genuine old school legend who had orchestrated Wonderful Town, West Side Story, Gypsy, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, just legendary scores that he helped to orchestrate or orchestrated by himself. And this, Crazy for You, was his second to last Broadway show. But as important as those two men were in establishing this authentic Gershwin sound, an orchestrator's job is really just working out who will play in the pit and how. Before that, somebody has to actually craft the shape of the music we will hear in the dances. And the dance arrangements for Crazy for You are by Peter Howard. Now, Peter Howard had written the dance arrangements for Hello, Dolly, 1776, Chicago, Annie. He was the man who sat in a hotel room for hours teaching Rex Harrison how to sing his part in My Fair Lady. He also wrote the arrangement of Cole Porter's Anything Goes, featured at the beginning of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. He had even worked on a little section of an earlier Gershwin reboot, My One and Only. He was probably the most qualified person alive in 1992 to create really authentic sounding dance arrangements. Just to give you some context, when Peter Howard died, the New York Times interviewed Susan Stroman, the director and choreographer of Crazy for You, who said this about him, quote, "The dance music arranger is the unsung hero of a Broadway show, and Peter was the greatest dance arranger. A composer writes 32 bars of a song, for example, Gershwin's I Got Rhythm, and Peter turns it into a 12-minute dance arrangement. He understood style, entertainment value, when the characters were in love, when they were supposed to have a comic or a dramatic moment, and most of all, how to support the choreography with the music." So high praise from Susan Stroman, and she would know what she was talking about. She worked side by side with him to craft the dance and the dance arrangements, which work hand in hand in Crazy for You. So Peter Howard had decades of experience working with the language of Broadway dance music, pioneered by Gershwin, Cole Porter, Rodgers in the 1930s. I had a delightful conversation with Peter Howard's son, Jason, who recalls hearing his father preparing to play Rhapsody in Blue with an orchestra, and talked about his father's love for all kinds of older music, especially ragtime and classic show music. By the time Peter Howard wrote the dance arrangements you hear in Crazy for You, this kind of music had been heard on Broadway for more than 60 years, augmented by significant advances in big band arrangements. The experience of working for decades in this very advanced, sophisticated style made Peter Howard and the Crazy for You orchestrators even better suited than the original orchestrator of Girl Crazy, the Gershwin musical from which many of the songs in Crazy for You emerge. So let's go back and trace some of those developments. When Robert Russell Bennett wrote orchestrations for Girl Crazy, he had recently come back from Paris, where he had studied with the legendary French pedagogue Nadia Boulanger. Just before he left for Paris, he had orchestrated Showboat in 1927, which is perhaps the masterpiece in the older style. But the world had changed while he was gone. The orchestra for Girl Crazy had a pit full of soon-to-be swing legends. Playing in that 1930 Girl Crazy Gershwin pit were Benny Goodman, Gene Krupa, Glenn Miller, and Jimmy Dorsey. It took Bennett a couple of years to learn how to master the new swing sound, which at that point was really new to Broadway. And some people speculate that the original ending of I Got Rhythm may have actually been written by Glenn Miller. We don't have actually a true record of that era. Some of these arrangements have been lost, and reconstructions that we have are based partially on later recordings. We have such a recording of Ethel Merman from 1937 singing what we suspect might be the original chart at a memorial service following Gershwin's death. Here's a clip of it.
An old man trouble, say I don't mind him, 'cause you won't find him round my door. I got starlight, and I got sweet dreams, I got my man who could ask for anything more, who could ask for anything more. Oh, who could ask for anything more. Who could ask for anything more.
So I hope you noticed the clipped brass version of the melody and the sax section playing against it over a pretty simple rhythm section. This is similar to what we might hear in popular music of the time, but not as advanced as what we might hear right around the same time about 5 miles northeast in Harlem. For example, Fletcher Henderson recorded this track 11 days before Girl Crazy opened. I think you'll agree there's a lot of different things going on. This is a much fresher, hipper sound that's developing. Hasn't reached Broadway yet. It's still in the world of jazz. Robert Russell Bennett is a legend in Broadway orchestration. I don't want to badmouth him, but his way of working out this tune sounds old-fashioned today. Again, Crazy for You's arrangements and orchestrations have some qualities that sound a lot like Gershwin's orchestral music from the 20s and 30s, and a lot of music that sounds like it's filtered through subsequent swing-era arrangements of Gershwin's music. This process of updating the sound of these classic tunes was underway almost immediately, actually. The first film version of Crazy for You from 1932 ditches almost the whole score, but keeps I Got Rhythm, and you can hear how that version has changed a little already. Here's a snippet of it. They actually add a very lackluster second section to the tune as well, because I Got Rhythm hasn't quite become the iconic standalone hit we now recognize. Today, we would never think of adding a new tune or lyric to this song. The tune and the lyric are the song. But at this point, in 1932, a couple years after the show opens, we don't have that sense of respect for it yet. Now, 13 years after the original Broadway production, Tommy Dorsey accompanied Judy Garland in the second film version, which also stars Mickey Rooney. Now, Mickey and Judy they're the iconic film stars of the let's put on a show and save the theater storytelling in that era. So Crazy for You is in a way paying homage to that as well. Those 13 years between the opening of Girl Crazy and the second film version have made a huge difference. The horns are playing a far more complicated set of figurations. The strings have a much bigger part in the proceedings, and the backup chorus is singing extremely sophisticated reharmonizations. This arrangement I'll play you a snippet of here owes a lot to Fletcher Henderson, Duke Ellington, Don Redman, Basie, Benny Goodman, the other pioneers of the swing arrangement who have been working hard to really make advances in this style. You can hear it in this arrangement.
Who could ask for anything more? Old man Trouble, I don't mind him. You won't find him round my door. I got starlight, I got sweet dreams, I got my man. Who could ask for anything more? Who could ask for anything more? Who could ask for anything more? I got rhythm, I got music, I got my man. Who could ask for anything more? I got daisies in green pastures, I got my man. Who could ask for anything more? Old man Trouble, I don't mind him. You won't find him. Hang around my front or back door. I got starlight, I got sweet dreams, I got my man. Who could ask for anything more? Who could ask for anything more?
This music also sounds more like the Gershwin that we know now. To put it another way, Gershwin's legacy was a team effort. Gershwin's music has a harmonic complexity and a melodic subtlety that makes it some of the best music of this era to arrange like this. But we don't want to confuse the original Gershwin with the arrangements through which we today have learned them. More than a decade of swing-era innovations had resulted at this point in a vocabulary that could spin out a lot of possibilities that simply would never have occurred to Robert Russell Bennett in 1930, as talented as he was. At some point, our cultural memory starts to conflate these two Gershwins into one Gershwin. The new sound couldn't exist without Gershwin's original innovations, but it's the version of Gershwin from the 30s and the 40s swing bands, and the 50s albums of folks like Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, and Frank Sinatra, those iconic arrangements of those standards that are fixed in our memory as the Gershwin sound. Now, here's a snippet of the Crazy for You version of that tune. Notice how seamlessly it slips from ragtime into swing, how folks on stage are using objects from the world of the show as percussion instruments, and how everything works together to tell the story of the town being transformed through music. All the while, the music is nodding to actual snippets of Gershwin's own arrangements and even other choreography, like Michael Kidd's choreography for Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. Before I leave this topic, I want to point out something that we sometimes overlook. The idea that songs are malleable and should continually be updated and rearranged is a pretty American idea. And that idea is a break with European culture that happened quite a long time ago. While the German-speaking world was playing Schubert, Schumann, Brahms' Lieder, essentially the way the composers wrote them, Americans were playing fast and loose with Stephen Foster's music, which occupied a very similar cultural space. European conductors would sometimes update the orchestrations of a work they thought wasn't very well executed, like Mahler updating Schumann's orchestrations that he thought didn't quite hit the mark. But they wouldn't dream of throwing out most of the musical content and only keeping the melody. It's we Americans who do that. We do it all the time. In the next video, I'll try to pinpoint some Gershwinisms in Crazy for You that are distinct to his sounds, which we wouldn't necessarily find in other similar scores by Cole Porter, Irving Berlin, or Richard Rodgers. Like and subscribe for more videos and more content like this. If you like this, there's more where this came from. We'll see you next time.